Oh, hello. Today we are starting on a new reading vlog experiment project thing. I posted a while back about how I am going to do a split version of my 5-star predictions this year, where I pick 5 that I think could be 5 stars for me. And then I'm also letting my patrons/members pick 5 books that they think could be 5 stars. So the way that I'm doing this is I had a couple of posts that went up over the course of about 2 months asking for recommendations, and I got 36 recommendations. Of those 36, I had already read 5, and those 5 were The Woman in White, which is one of my all-time favorite books, so that was a great recommendation, and then 4 other books, all of which I think the least highly rated was 3.5, so Columbine by Dave Cullen, The Library Book by Susan Orlean, Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, and The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. So I've read all 5 of those, and all of them I enjoyed. So this bodes well. I should say that also the reason that I decided to do it with patron and member, this was actually one of the reasons I even started those things of when I have reading projects where I want recommendations from my followers, but I am trying to make sure that they are like best faith recommendations, because sometimes I get comments or like people asking me to read things that it's clear either they're trolling me or I think that they just don't necessarily know my tastes very well, which is fine. I mean, it's okay to be pushed outside your comfort zone, but if I'm looking for a recommendation from followers, part of why I even decided to do this was to have like an experimental group, basically, who can be, subjected to my experiments and whims. So I appreciate them all being my guinea pigs. So of the 31 recommendations left that I have not read of the overall 36 I got, I flagged 12 of them as being interesting to me, and I think in total I can pick 9 to help me define my TBR, because I'm gonna let my members and my patrons each pick 1, so I can have up to 3 choices for each of them, and then I'm gonna pick the other 3 based on what I'm interested in. So the 12 that caught my eye were Twilight of Democracy by Anne Applebaum, political nonfiction, The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, which is like a mystery thriller, His and Hers by Alice Finney, which is also a thriller, My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, which is sort of like a horror satire kind of deal. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which I actually got multiple suggestions on that one, which is a classic. I think it's a novella. The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery, that was another one that got multiple recommendations for it. We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This is one I know very little about, but every time I've seen people talking about it, it's intrigued me. So I flagged that one. The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton, which is about economics. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, A Life by Jane Sharon DeHart, which is a biography. Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I've never read anything from Neil Gaiman, so I thought that could be interesting. The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is one where I have put that on my 5-star predictions in the past, so I agree with it, but I'm also just weirdly intimidated by that book. I don't know why. Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, which is nonfiction about the Sackler family, and then A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. So, based on those 12, I need to eliminate 3. I think I'm gonna eliminate Twilight of Democracy by Anne Applebaum, because I'm about to read Red Famine from Anne Applebaum, so I feel like back to back that could be a little much, because I've read Iron Curtain from her, and that book was grim, so we're gonna eliminate that one. I'm gonna eliminate The Blue Castle just because I want to read a classic, but I want to prioritize books that I already have, because that way also it's like bolstering the recommendation, because if I already own the book, then I also have some level of interest in it going in, so that should help that be a more successful pick, and I already have The Yellow Wallpaper, so I'm gonna pick that as my classic, I think, so I'll eliminate The Blue Castle. And then one more. I'm gonna eliminate Ruth Bader Ginsburg just because I feel like a biography, A, it's so long, but B, I just think that might be kind of a weird one to try to evaluate in this kind of mindset of looking for something that's an all-time favorite. So I'm gonna eliminate that. Okay, so that means I have 9 left, and let's pick the 3 that I definitely want to read. Well, if I was going strictly by ones I already own, I do own Empire of Pain, the 5th season, The Deficit Myth, The Yellow Wallpaper, My Best Friend's Exorcism. So I already own those 5. Okay, I think what I'm gonna do, I'm also going to eliminate Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, just because it doesn't fit into my little idea I just came up with. So my idea is that I'll have one group of them vote on the nonfiction pick that I'll choose, because I have both Empire of Pain and The Deficit Myth as audio already. So I'll let one group pick which nonfiction book I'm going to read for this. And then the other group, I will let pick a popular book that I get recommended or asked to read a lot, or like gets brought up to me a lot. And that would be The Turn of the Key, A Psalm for the Wild Built, and The 5th season. So I'll read one of those. So that means I'm gonna read The Yellow Wallpaper and My Best Friend's Exorcism, because I own both of those already. And then I'm gonna read We Ride Upon the Sticks. We're gonna let that be sort of like my real wild card, where I would not pick it up if it wasn't for this. Like, this wasn't really fully on my radar, but the fact that this is getting recommended, I'm intrigued, and that will be sort of our true mystery one. So I will post the polls to let people pick my last 2, but I have 3 of them already, so let's see. I should remind everybody going into this project that my definition of a 5-star is an all-time favorite. So if it's a favorite of the year, I give it 4.5. If it's a book that I feel like is one of the best books I've ever read, that gets a 5-star. So that's why I have a pretty low hit rate so far on this. I guess, yeah, I didn't really set up why I'm even doing this. I'm not that great at picking 5 stars for me, so this is sort of are my subscribers better at picking a 5-star for me than I am at picking one for myself? I am honestly I will not be surprised if they are better than I am. So we'll see. But yeah, anyway, so that's sort of the precipitating why of this project. I will check back in with you guys once I have my full TBR identified, but I'm excited. Let's get to getting here. All right, just checking in because I'm finally ready to get going because, oh, hey, Marple. I have the winners from the 2 polls I ran. So my patrons picked The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin, which I'm gonna be honest, I'm a little surprised. If I had guessed, I think I would have guessed that they would have had me read Turn of the Key, but they picked The 5th Season, so that's what we're gonna go with. And then my channel members picked Empire of Pain by Patrick Keefe. Is that his last name? Yeah, Patrick R. Keefe. So that is gonna be the 5th book. But today I am going to start on my first selection that we already knew, which is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So I have so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to approach this. The specific thing that has been recommended is the short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. So I feel like that in particular is what I am looking to give 5 stars to. However, it is within a short story collection. So I feel like that's the whole work that I'm going to read, but I don't know. Maybe once I actually read it, we can talk about like how to figure out if this was or wasn't 5 stars. I kind of like the idea of there being a short story in the mix because I have a nonfiction pick and then I have some novels. So like kind of like that idea, but I also don't want to put so much pressure on a single short story. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but this is going to be the first one I dive into. So I read the titular Yellow Wallpaper, and then I went back and read the introduction, and then I've read probably about half of the short stories from there. So I feel like I have at least an initial impression of Ms. Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So it's interesting because I totally see why people recommended this to me and why this gets taught. Basically, the setup, well, I feel like I don't want to tell you much about it because it's a pretty short story, and I feel like maybe you should just experience it for yourself, but like thematically, I think that this is a lot about women being gaslit, like the treatment of women in a medical setting, and how women are just like not taken seriously. And I can see why this is taught a lot, because I think that there's a lot that can be said, switching arms here, in terms of its historical milieu, thematically what it's saying. I think as a story, I enjoyed it, but it's the rare situation where I actually feel like it would have been served by being longer. Like, I think that this would have worked better. The Yellow Wallpaper, I think, would have worked better as like a novella or a short novel, because I think that would have allowed a little bit more menace and sense of dread to build. So for me, the short story itself, I would say is like 4 stars probably. And then like the collection as a whole, at this point, I'd probably give like a 3.5. So I'm gonna keep reading because I am enjoying them. I think that they're pretty variable in their quality. There's some that I quite like, and that there's others that I think are a little so-so. But I'm also very intrigued. I read the introduction to learn more about like her as a person, and I think she seems like a very interesting woman. It seems like she was minimally bisexual, but maybe even just like sapphic through and through, but she ended up getting into this marriage that she didn't really want to be in, but she kind of got like sweet talked into it, and then she had like a very serious case of postpartum depression, which seems like influenced the Yellow Wallpaper. So I think all that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying this pretty well. I don't see a way that this is going to end up being a 5-star, but I do think that this was a good recommendation in the sense of like, I'm enjoying this, and yeah, I'm glad to, I've seen people talk about the Yellow Wallpaper a lot, and it's one of those stories that I never got around to reading. So I'm also glad to just like know what that's about. So anyway, I'll check back in when I finish the collection up. Alrighty, I have finally finished up Yellow Wallpaper and Selected Writings by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Yeah, I think when we last talked, I was about halfway through-ish, and I finished all the short stories, and yeah, I think I feel pretty much the same way I did at that point, which is there are some highs, there are some lows, and I would give the collection as a whole like a B+, so that feels like a 3.5 to me. The Yellow Wallpaper, the short story itself, however, I'm going to give 4 stars to, and that is specifically what was recommended, so we're gonna count this as a 4-star. But yeah, no, I'm glad that this pushed me to go ahead and read this. Sadly, not a 5-star, too bad, but I think a very reasonable prediction, recommendation, guess, whatever we want to call it. So we will call this one done, and we will charge on to the next one. I'm thinking is going to be My Best Friend's Exorcism, or We Ride Upon the Sticks. I haven't decided which one, but one of those two is what I'm thinking. Alright, so I am about halfway through We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This is a wacky book, guys. So it is told in first person plural. So everything is we, our, etc. But there is no one character giving that we. So it would be like if I was talking about a summer camp and I said, you know, we went to our cabins and then we got our bathing suits and then we went swimming in the lake. Well, usually in a narrative, when that is the narration, you know that I, Mara, am the one using that first person plural, that I'm a part of that we, but there's no defined person giving that plural first person account. So it's just interesting. I don't know that I've ever read a book in first person plural like this, but you pick up on it pretty quickly. So the setup for this is, it's a field hockey team in 1989 in Salem Village, which is now called Danvers. Some of them are descendants of the people accused of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials. They are all on this field hockey team, and they basically make like a pact. Like they make a witchcraft pact via these tube socks / this notebook that they name Emilio Estevez, where they like write their names and make these spells to be better at field hockey. And it's mostly just like hijinks with the group. Considering how many characters we're keeping up with, I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, there's like, let's say 11, 12 main characters in here. And the fact that it's this kind of interesting plural first person narrative, you actually get a pretty good, like, distinctive voice for all of them. And it's also such a quirky, oddball vibe. So like, let's take, on the back, when I was reading before I started, I was like, oh yeah, what is this about? One of the little lines on here says, Jen Forenza, whose bleach blonde claw sees and knows all. And I was like, what does that mean? Well, we find out pretty quickly that one of the co-captains has a sentient 80s hairdo called the Claw, and it gets introduced early on. Okay, among ourselves, none of us ever referred to the popular's 80s hairstyle as the Claw. It was a name Becca Bijelka's Serbian dad came up with to describe the gravity-defying architectural feats teen girls lovingly erected each morning fresh out of the shower. Sometimes behind her back, some of us like to imagine Jen's Claw going head-to-head with other prominent claws at Danvers High. Claws like the Leaning Tower on Paula Kavanaugh or the Space Needle of Missy Evans. As the two made contact in the hall, each girl a mountain goat clashing for the alpha position. The Claw's only enemy was water, or so it believed. And it is always capitalized as if it is truly sentient. And the Claw comments on things, like at some point, where is it? This made me literally laugh out loud. It'd be at least another 30 minutes before a new bus could arrive. It's a sign, hissed the Claw, carpe diem. Some of us were a little taken aback that the Claw knew Latin. Still, it wasn't bad advice. It's just a very quirky, wacky point of view. I would say that the writing feels a little hard to always figure out what's going on, and some of that is purposeful and some of that is the prose style itself. Like, it feels very kind of obscure, or like it purposefully obfuscates things. But yeah, so far this is very wacky. I don't know that I've read a book like this before. It feels unique and I'm enjoying it. So we'll see how I get on. But yeah, so far so good. Good morning, my angels. I did finish We Ride Upon the Sticks, or We Ride Upon Sticks by Quamberry. I really like this. This is actually a great example of why this is a great project, because I don't think I would have picked this up if y'all hadn't picked this for me. I really enjoyed it. Now, I really like the actual final chapter, like the final conclusion. Also, if you hear weird noises, Marple is literally, like, I feel like maybe I should just show you. She's like sitting in front of this mirror and licking herself, like watching herself and licking herself. Oh, okay, maybe she's shy now. Sorry about that. I got distracted. She was like looking at herself while licking herself. It was intense. Girl, I get it, you know. I feel like that was a moment of radical body positivity for herself. Anyway, yeah, I would not have picked this up if it weren't for this project. Really enjoyed it. Did have problems. Not the final chapter. The final chapter I actually really liked. I thought the ending was great. But I would say from like 70% to 90%, it kind of dipped a little bit for me. Maybe even like 60 to 90%. There was like maybe a third of this that I thought kind of slowed down or got a little samey. But this is it's a very specific voice in terms of its humor. And that humor really, really worked for me. I thought this was funny. This actually really evoked those 80s coming of age movies. Like, I could see this being a fantastic movie. I would love to see the movie of this. I also realized at some point that the first person plural, I think is because they are all, maybe I was just stupid and didn't realize this at first. I think they can all like be in each other's minds, because there's one point where, the goalie has La Splooch, which is basically a witch mark on her neck, and the splooch begins to speak like the claw can, and the claw and the splooch are speaking to each other in the girls' minds, and then the person they're thinking about, they realize they can hear the girls and the claw and the splooch all talking to each other. I don't know. It's a weird book, guys. This is a pretty weird book, but I enjoyed it. So this is a lot about like womanhood or like gender in your teen years, finding your place. I think ultimately this is a really joyful exploration of relationships between femme presenting people. Yeah, there was interesting discussions about race and sexuality, and I don't know. This was good. It's a very interesting written book. I was looking up the author. It seems like she's a poet, so I think that explains why the writing is kind of quirky. Yeah, I'll know. I did really enjoy this. I would give this like 4 stars, I think. A solid 4 stars. I think that it lost me a little bit kind of towards that little chunk of third. So I think that dinged it down from being a 4.5 for me. But yeah, I'm really glad I read this. This was very interesting. Would recommend if you're looking for a unique read. And yeah, I would, like I said, I think this would be a great movie. I would love to see this get adapted. Another one down. I will mention that I have started the audiobook of Empire of Pain. So that is grim. But I'm working on that. And then I've got 2 ebooks to read. So I've got the 5th season and my best friend's Exorcism. So I'm not sure which I'm going to start next, but I'm definitely working on Empire of Pain. So you might see that as the next update, or you might see me reading one of those ebooks. I don't know yet. Hey guys, so I just finished the 5th season and I realized that the check-in I filmed previously, I think I should not include, because I knew I had a theory about this book coming into it, which was proven correct, and bless people's hearts, I know that they very much tried to I surmised it from some comparisons people were making. Nobody was trying to actively spoil this for me. I think I just, at some point I figured out what I thought maybe the like thing that people are so gagged about this book is. So I'm not going to include my middle thing because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But that being said, holy shit, this book is amazing. It's one of those, it's so hyped, right? Like it is such a hyped book and you think like, how can it live up to the hype? And yet somehow it does. It is just so good. I don't really know how to talk about it or what to say. Let me give you a rundown of what is going on in this book. If you somehow have been living under a rock, pun if you've read the book. If you've somehow been living under a rock, this is kind of overview of this. So the 5th season is by N.K. Jemisin. I have read 2 other things from her before. I enjoyed both of them. This is definitely my favorite of what I've read from her. This is a fantasy world that has essentially like cataclysmic tectonic events, I guess maybe would be the right way to think about this. Every so often, periodically, every, I guess, couple hundred years based on what I was reading in the appendix, because of the fact that there are basically dystopian events happening with frequency on, like, in this world. This whole society has been sort of built around preparing for these events. And there are different people with different magical abilities called orangins. Maybe that's how you say that. And they are necessary to save or like preserve life on this planet or in this world, but they are also reviled. Like people are, I guess it's like a folk fear kind of a situation. So if children who have these abilities are able to survive their childhood, they're given to these guardians who take them to this place called the Fulcrum, which is where they are trained in how to use those abilities. And we are basically following 3 women who are all orangins. So we are following a young girl named Amaya. We're following a young woman named Cyan, and then we are following a middle-aged woman named Asun. And we start with Asun, and Asun's point of view is in the second person, which I know some people don't love, but I actually think that's a very approachable version of second person POV. So I would recommend this book if you are interested in reading something from that POV that I think is pretty easy to follow, especially once you get like further into the book. I think it makes sense of why the author made that choice, because I would say Asun, you guys can tell I'm terrible at the pronunciation in this book, but her story is kicked off. It's the first piece of the story we're getting, and it is kicked off with her coming home and finding her son murdered, and murdered by her husband, who has abducted her daughter. So she is on a quest to find what happened to her daughter. And then we also are getting different stories from the other two women that I don't really want to get into because I don't want to, this is why I'm not showing you the clip I previously filmed. So this book is clearly amazing. Like, you don't need to hear that from me. This series is the only series, I believe, that's ever won a Hugo Award for each of the entries in the book. N.K. Jemisin won back-to-back-to-back Hugos on this. And you don't need to hear it from me that this book is great. It is great. I don't, I'm sure people, it's a very strong flavor, so I can definitely see that some people just wouldn't like that flavor. But insofar as one can be objective about such things, this book is extremely high quality, both from a entertainment factor, and there's a lot of stuff going on in this world. It's very interesting world building. Where the last line of this book is very intriguing. I don't really know where things are going. So I think plot-wise, this is really interesting. World building is fascinating, super cool magic system, and characters are great. The writing is great. It's a very strong flavor. So I can see that just won't be something that everyone enjoys, but I guess what we can talk about in this project, since I'm struggling with how to talk about this book, we'll just get to the is this a 5-star? And I am torn here because I save 5 stars for like an all-time favorite book. And I don't know if this is an all-time favorite book. This is definitely a favorite book of the year. This is unquestionably at least a 4.5 star. I'm comparing this in my mind to The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, because as soon as I finished that book, I was like, this is one of my favorite books I've ever read. And similarly, I feel like it's a book that it's hard to argue about the quality of it. And so I feel like what we're talking about now is this ineffable je ne sais quoi element, the X factor that makes something an all-time favorite. And I just don't know. I don't know that this is. Now that I'm talking this through, this is a favorite of the year. Quality-wise, this is an A+. But I think the X factor, I wonder if because I spent a lot of this book having a hypothesis and waiting to see if it was proved correct, I wonder if that kept me from fully emotionally engaging in this in the way that I wonder if I hadn't been sitting there wondering if that's what was going on, if I could have just like gone along for the ride and been like, no, oh my gosh, like just like I think a lot of people have. I'm definitely going to keep reading in this series. I could see other books where I don't have that experience of like proving my hypothesis right. I could see other books potentially being 5 stars, and I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being a 5-star trilogy if they are all as good as this first one, which from what I've heard they are. Yeah, like I assume that this very likely could be an all-time favorite trilogy for me. But for now, I'm gonna say a guilty 4.5 because I feel like it's not the book's fault that I wasn't surprised by the thing, but it just is what it is. So I'm just gonna leave it there. Definitely my favorite thing we've read so far. And I had this on my 5-star prediction list at some point, I'm remembering. So I think this was a great suggestion and a very smart pick. So I think my patrons did a great job, or whoever suggested this one. This was a great suggestion. I'm feeling guilty that I'm not giving this 5 stars is kind of where we're sitting at with this, but a hearty, delighted 4.5 stars for sure. And yeah, good God, it's not every day that you finish a book and are like, yeah, this, I can see that this is going to be a classic. It's a modern classic for sure, and I think will definitely stand the test of time. And I'm looking forward to continuing in the series, but for now, we'll just leave it there, and we've got 2 books left. Hey guys, I just got into bed and remembered I need to take a shower tonight because I want my hair to look good tomorrow. So, fun times. Before I go do that, I thought I would tell you that once I get done with doing that, the plan is to finish my best friend's Exorcism tonight. So, setup for this one is Abby and Gretchen are BFFs in the 1980s. I'm realizing I didn't plan this, and I don't think you guys did either, but there are definitely parallels between this book and We Ride Upon Sticks. But Gretchen and Abby are best friends. Gretchen's family is like uber religious and abusive, and it's like not great, but Gretchen's family has more money than Abby's does. And as is Grady Hendrix's want, I think he does a good job of portraying female friendships. Like, I really like the way he makes them very complicated, but but not in like this sort of like, teenage girls are mean to each other kind of thing. It's more, I don't know, I think he's a good observer of sort of the like hurts and intricacies of female friendship, particularly at that age. Anyway, as is suggested by the title, Gretchen becomes possessed. Abby's trying to figure out what the fuck she's gonna do about that. Things are progressing from there. I will say so far, this is my least favorite of this is the third Grady Hendrix I've tried. It's my least favorite so far because it has moments of the writing from him that I love. Like I said, I do really like the way he builds his female friendships, and I think that is present in this book for the most part. But there's something about the writing that isn't the same like propulsive, like, oh, I can't put this down kind of vibe that I've gotten from the other two books I've read from him. So I'm a little disappointed so far, but I'm still having a good time. It's an interesting premise. And like I said, it timed out interestingly with We Ride Upon Sticks, because it's like, oh, we're back in the 80s. I wonder this, it's interesting because I know one of the criticisms for We Ride Upon Sticks is that if you didn't grow up in the 80s, you won't connect with it as much. But I'm actually finding that much more the case for this one. Like, this feels much denser and like more heavily referential to the 80s. I know a good amount about the 1980s just because I was a 90s baby, so it's not that far away from my experience, but I think that I'm feeling like I'm not quite vibing with it the way maybe I would be if it were referencing things that were more familiar or like immediately relatable to me from my teenage years in the early aughts. So yeah, liking but not loving, and I have loved the other two books, so for that reason, this one's a little disappointing so far, but we'll see how it turns out, and hopefully we can wrap this up tonight. I think I have a manageable number of pages left. It's always hard to tell on Kindle, but I think based on the location, not too ambitious to try to finish that up tonight. So that is the plan. Okay, so next day, I did manage to finish my best friend's Exorcism last night. What did I think of it? There are definitely highs and lows. I think that it's an interesting, now that I've read a couple of his books, I do really enjoy, so one of the things that I look for in horror in general is some sort of metaphor. I think really good horror is literalizing something about the human experience that is dark or fearful. And I will say that now that I've read 3 books from Grady Hendrix, I actually really like how he does that. Like, I think in Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, a lot of that was about making a metaphor out of racism and out of misogyny or intimate partner violence kind of stuff. I think Final Girl Support Group was a lot about the violence done towards young girls by our culture and then also interpersonally. And then this one I feel like was a lot about religion and how religion can be really toxic and harmful to people. So, I liked that. He always brings some grossness. So if you have a problem with like bug stuff or bodily fluid stuff or child abuse essay stuff, all of that, it's a horror book, so strap in for some of it. I definitely don't think this is the most extreme version of that you could read in horror, but if you're just a casual dabbler in horror, yeah, just know that. So for me, I think what was missing in this though was the writing in terms of the propulsiveness of the prose, which is something I've really enjoyed in the other 2 books I've read from him. I just didn't feel like that was there in this book. I did really like the way that this ended, which I don't want to get into spoilers, but I very much enjoyed the conclusion to the story. So I'm conflicted. I'm between like a 3 and a 3.5. I think because I have a pretty high standard for him, like I've given his past 2 books 4.5. This kind of feels more like a 3, but if I'm comparing it to just any horror book I might pick up, I would probably put it closer to a 3.5. So I don't know, I'm somewhere in there. I just think that for me, this wasn't as readable as some of his past books have been. I think I talked about the fact that that might be due to me not being as up on all the 80s references. That's certainly possible. So yeah, I enjoyed this. I thought it was good. Definitely think that this was a solid pick for me based on how much I've liked his books in the past. But this was definitely not my favorite of his, and definitely not a 5-star read read for me, but enjoyable, and a reminder to me that I should go ahead and pick up Horror Story, or Horror Store, I think is what it's called, which is the other kind of like big book from him in his backlist, just so that I'm fully caught up when we finally get his Haunted House book, which I think comes out in January of next year. Yeah, so I really still like him. I think this was a good pick for me. This one just happened to not work as well, but I do just really, I don't know. I particularly like seeing the full journey of the girls' friendship. I really liked that a lot, actually. This is making me think it's more like a 3.5. I think, okay, I'm gonna put it at a 3.5 because I did have things in this I really did particularly like, but kind of disappointing to me based on how I've responded to his other books. But anyway, the last thing left for me to finish is Empire Pain. So I will check in with you guys, I guess, as I'm making my way through that more. I feel like I'm gonna struggle to check in on that one just because, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys about that one when I've made some more progress. Okay, I just realized I have not checked in with you guys on Empire of Pain, so I feel like probably we should do that while I make my lunch. So, Empire of Pain, whew, it is basically, it's an interesting book. It's sort of like I think the subtitle is A Portrait of a Family, and it's definitely very focused, so far at least, on the Sackler family. So if you don't know, the Sackler family are the owners of Purdue Pharma, which is the producer of OxyContin, and they have been largely credited with, credit may not be the right verb, but they are largely the ones who have come to be seen as the ones responsible for popularizing pain management as we currently know it in the US, with popularizing and normalizing the use of pain medication for non-palliative purposes, whether intentionally or not, in terms of what some of the consequences of that have been, of essentially kicking off the opioid epidemic here in the US, which, you know, our medical system is super well prepared to handle. So it starts off, the first part is all about the founders of kind of the Sackler dynasty. So we have Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond, and Arthur is sort of like the driving force, and we start off like really literally following them from their childhood, how they all became doctors, sort of their working class background, and sort of a boom bust cycle that their father experienced and how that shaped them, time working at a psychiatric facility, and some early connections they were making with how like brain chemistry impacts psychological health, and then, you know, acquiring, I think it was called Purdue Frederick, and then they spun it off into Purdue Pharma. So that's kind of like how it starts, is it really is looking at the Sacklers themselves. And then the next part, which is where I'm at now, it's kind of starting to take a bigger view. So I think kind of the main character of the first part was more Arthur. The main character of this one is more Richard Sackler, who's sort of like next gen. So there's a lot of people in the mix at this point, and we're starting to talk about like how part of the interesting thing about Arthur was that he was also in advertising. So like really what was unique about the Sacklers was how they connected the machine of advertising and capitalism to pharmaceuticals. And if you live in the US, you know that we are heavily marketed pharmaceuticals, which is something pretty unique. If you've ever lived outside or traveled outside the US, you will see that the level of advertising around prescription drugs is unique to the US. And so that's a lot of what we're kind of learning or thinking about, is the marriage between capitalism, money-making endeavors with health and with prescription medications in particular. So it's a very sort of wide-ranging story. Like we literally had a chapter about Chinese antiques, you know what I mean? So like he is looking for lots of interesting ways to talk. He's definitely one of those narrative nonfiction kind of storytellers where he's looking for sort of a lot of different avenues to tell us the story. There's, even when it seems, I guess that's probably my critique so far, is it doesn't seem very focused, but I'm not finished, so maybe by the end I'll understand how all these different pieces come together. And I will say all of these pieces are very interesting, very compellingly told. I'm interested in everything that we're talking about. It's making me think about a lot of different things. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I'm waiting to see how he's got a lot of chess pieces on the board, and I'm waiting to see how all of that ends up tying together. Or if it does, maybe it won't. We'll find find out. But yeah, so anyway. Also, did you guys just hear Marple throw up behind me? Because that's a thing. Let me clean that up. It's very sad. She scares herself when she throws up. And so she does it and then she like runs away. Like I'm looking at her over there and she looks like she's afraid. So I'll clean this up, finish making my lunch, and then I'll check in when I'm done. So far, this one's really good. Not sure if it's gonna be, right now it doesn't feel like a 5-star, but it definitely feels like a 4, 4.5. So I don't know, we'll see how things progress. So I have finished Empire of Pain, and I mean, the hype is deserved. It's an excellent book. I think as I got further into it, I got more into it because it started being closer to like a All the President's Men, Bad Blood kind of vibe of some kind of corporate or like institutional corruption and the inner workings of how that happened, which is a story I'm always down for. I really like that kind of investigative reporting and that kind of, story behind the story, think Spotlight. I mean, that's just something I like. And there was a lot more of that in the back half. And I think I get his sort of overall project, which is what about Purdue Pharma's corporate culture allowed this to happen? And his answer, his hypothesis is the specific dynamics within the Sackler family, where they came from, their interpersonal dynamics and drama, which there's plenty of, this idea of the good name of the Sacklers and that kind of being why they were so focused on very showy philanthropy and not tying their name to the company in that one-to-one way in terms of the marketing. I think all of this stuff, I think I talked about this in my check-in, but like all the advertising stuff is super interesting and very helpful context of like, this is kind of like how we have the situation we have around pharmaceutical advertising in the US. So all of it was great. And I would give this like a 4.5. I don't think that this hits a level of all-time favorite, but this is definitely one of the best nonfiction books I've read this year, so very comfortably a 4.5. And I learned a lot from it, would highly recommend. And I think that this really proves to me that Patrick Keefe, I think, is the new Michael Lewis for me. He's not quite as readable as Michael Lewis, but he has the same sort of ability to take potentially kind of dry or uninteresting subjects and really just like bring them to life. And I think he has definitely a gift for narrative nonfiction. So I'm really excited for his next one coming out this year, which is about con men. I think that comes out sometime in June, which is like grifter, all that kind of stuff is very something I'm into. So yeah, very solid recommendation. And I guess now we just need to meet together and wrap this bad boy up. Alrighty, so we are officially done with all 5 books. Pretty successful all around. I didn't hate any of these. And 2 books that I really, really enjoyed. So if we're talking about this as how it compares to my own ability to pick a 5-star, I don't think we fully know yet because I have 5 that I'm going to do this year as well to do sort of apples to apples. I think in general, I usually have, if I pick 10, I usually have 1 or 2 5-stars. So you guys picked 5 for me and I had none in there. But I don't know that that's like statistically that different. That being said, I do think it's interesting that the 2 books that I liked the best were the 2 that people specifically voted for versus just the general list. So maybe if I were going to do this again, maybe I would get the full list and then like just have people vote and maybe, oh, that might be actually kind of fun. Let me know if you guys like this idea. Maybe what we could do, I'm coming up with this on the fly, but maybe what we could do is I still like the idea of having like a smaller group of people pick the list, but maybe I could do some sort of like bracket style. You guys are voting and picking books for me. Maybe we could do that. that might be kind of fun. So let me know what you think about that idea. But just a final wrap up, I would say the one I liked the least, kind of well, like, I mean, I would be surprised that I guess none of this is surprising or not surprising because I expected to like all of them. The Grady Hendrix books. So my best friend's Exorcism, liked but didn't love, I would say. Definitely my least favorite of what I've read from him. I do have, I think, 2 more books in his backlist that I definitely want to read. Horror Store and We Sold Our Souls, I think, is the other one. So I'm still very interested in reading more from him. I still enjoyed my best friend's Exorcism. It just didn't have that same sort of like, ooh, I can't put this down quality, which I really enjoy from him. I would say next would be the Yellow Wallpaper and Other Stories. The Yellow Wallpaper itself is what I ended up rating, and I give that 4 stars. The collection as a whole, I would give 3.5. Enjoyable. I think I like it more as a historical document than as literature or like enjoyable reading, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I think this was a solid pick. I'm glad to have finally read The Yellow Wallpaper because I feel like it's a very kind of like famous short story in terms of horror type short fiction and also in the history of feminist literature. So I'm glad to have been made to read it. In the middle, I would put We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. I'm gonna say the one that I'm most excited this made me read because I don't know that I would have ever gotten to this without this project. And it's just a very fun, if you like the humor. I could see that if you were not on board with the humor in this would not be a fun book for you, but I loved the humor in this. And just such an interesting writing project of this sort of collective, plural, singular narrator, which is all of these girls mind melding and practicing witchcraft and the talking bangs and the splooch. I mean, like, it was a lot. This book went for it and in a way that I thought was really fun. So yeah, I'm really glad that this made me read this. This was really enjoyable. So I'd say this was the biggest hit in terms of I don't know that I would have read this without this project, and I'm really glad that I did. And then my 2 4.5s. So I would say The Empire of Pain is gonna be my runner-up because I would say it's a 4 to 4.5. I really enjoyed this. I mean, enjoy is a weird word to use given the subject matter. It was a very edifying experience and very compellingly told. Like I was saying, I think in my check-in, the moments where it was focused on the business aspect of it, I would say were the most compelling parts for me. Whereas while I get the reasons he went into a lot of the side bits and spent a lot of time on the family themselves, like I get why he did that, but I would say just for me, those weren't the most compelling parts of the book. And so anytime we were really getting into the minutia, rise of the advertising around pharmaceuticals and the stuff about their early lessons from marketing Valium, and then, you know, how Oxycontin came into the mix and how that progressed. Like, that was the stuff that was the most compelling to me in the book. And then I'm gonna say my favorite was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin because I'm between a 4.5 and a 5. What I guess, and by the way, you'll notice I picked up a physical copy, I got the box set of the trilogy. My guess is that this is going to be a series that's 5 stars, even if none of the individual books end up being 5 stars. I was very intimidated by this book. I think this is part of why I put it off so long, because I had just heard that it was hard to follow or hard to read because of the second person perspective bit of it. And I did not find that at all. And I wonder that if I hadn't guessed The Thing, based on what I'd heard from people talking about it previously, I wonder if this would have been even more impactful. But there's a lot of great stuff in this. I think where this leaves off is just like, what is gonna happen next? Like the very last line, I'm like, NK, I don't know where we're going, and I'm really excited. So I love this. I don't know yet if it's an all-time favorite. So for now, I think it's a 4.5. It's one I could see becoming a 5-star in retrospect or like as time goes on. So well written, not like elaborately written, but I think more literary in its quality. So if you're somebody who's curious about fantasy, but you're more of sort of a lit fic or a general fiction reader, this might be someplace to go. And yeah, I'm very glad that you guys finally made me read this because it has been on my TBR for 5-6 years and I just kept putting it off, and now I've read it and I'm very glad to have. So all in all, even if I didn't get any 5 stars from this, I had a great reading experience. And I feel like I learned things about myself. And I guess it's also interesting to think about what y'all's perception of me is based on these recommendations. I mean, I think what I see is a lot of variety, which is reflective of what I like to read. I do like to read a lot of different things. It is interesting to me that 2 of these books have kind of unusual perspectives in terms of which tense people are writing in. So I think that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that this was a pretty solid lineup of guesses of things that I might potentially absolutely love. So I feel like you guys know me pretty well. And yeah, let me know for sure what you guys think about that idea I had about the bracket. I think that might be fun, but it would be work. So you'll have to let me know if that's a good idea. And then, yeah, I'm excited to do the second half of this pairing where I read my 5 and we'll go head to head and see if either of us is any good at this. I don't seem to be great at it, so I don't, I don't really know what we're benchmarking against, but let me know what you thought about any of the books, and I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!